My name is Rob Leikind. I'm director of the American Jewish Committee, and on behalf of the Metropolis of New England and the Greek Orthodox Metropolis of New England and the American Jewish Committee, I am thrilled to welcome you here. This is going to be a wonderful, really exciting, interesting, fun evening. The genesis of this program really began about a year ago when the then Greek Consul General, Konstantinos Orthodox, who had been in the United States for a number of years, came and basically said, you know something, American Jews, Greek Americans have a great deal in common. We have elements of a shared history. We have shared values, shared tastes. Very often we have a shared sense of interests. And there's an opportunity that we shouldn't pass by to bring our communities together, to learn about what we share, shared history, come together and celebrate. And we started, the first program we did was about 6 months ago. And it happened at Hellenic College. And we had it was just around the time of Passover and Pascha, the Greek Orthodox Easter. And we had an extraordinary discussion, exploring the historic cognates of both Greek, the Passover holiday and Pascha, and how our traditions and cultures have helped shape our respective practices, the way we live, our values, our ideas about one another. But we didn't just learn, because being who we are, we recognize that you also have to have fun. And so there was dancing, and then of course there was food. And then we knew that the program was successful. We knew that the program was successful when the food ran out. Because people didn't leave for a long, long time after. There was a tremendous connection. And so many of us who've been working on this event have been very excited about coming here tonight, because it's another opportunity to continue this exploration. And we have two wonderful, extraordinary scholars, Professor Shaye Cohen and Father George Dragas, who will help us explore, take us back 2,000 years to a time which was formative for both the Greek Orthodox tradition and the Jewish tradition. A time when Greek and Jewish culture clashed, and all the Greeks and Jews clashed, but they also fed off each other and learned from one another and created each other's cultures in many important ways. It was also a time when the Hanukkah, the idea of Hanukkah first had its origins. And it was a time when our peoples began to shape one another. And so we're going to learn from them and how this impacted the Hanukkah, the celebration of Hanukkah, and how that holiday has shaped both of our traditions. And after that, of course, we have to have some fun music, Greek and Jewish music, and then of course food. So tonight it's an opportunity to learn, but it's also a celebration. We're thrilled that you're all here with us. Special thanks go to Father Dimitris Tonius, Rebecca Keys, the staff of the Metropolis and the American Jewish Committee for all they did for putting this together tonight. It's now my pleasure to introduce the acting Consul General for the for Greece here in New England, Panayota Katsarou. I hope I didn't do that injustice. Please. Thank you.
Good evening. It's a pleasure for me being here tonight, representing the Consul General of Greece, Mr. Methodios, who will be with you. But due to unfortunate circumstances and unforeseen circumstances, he has to be in Greece. His mother passed away last week, so he couldn't be with you tonight, and it's my pleasure to represent him. I would like, first of all, to begin by giving a special thanks to all of those who contributed in putting this event together, and especially His Eminence, the Metropolitan Methodios, and Mr. Robert Leikind, the AJC Boston Director. Both our communities have truly provided an inspiration of not only mutual understanding, but also promotion of their relations. This inspiration was first put into action March 2nd of this year at the Theological Cultural Center. Our community's involvement in culture and economy within the American society brings us together as a body of people who, with a common mission of promoting democratic values and principles. The same inspiration and effort of bonding also results through great initiatives, both inside and outside the United States, forming a community without borders. The conference, which is planned to take place in Thessaloniki, Greece, on May 15, 2012, between the Israeli and Greek diaspora, will not only bring Israelis and Greeks closer, but will also be enriched with other inspirational activities. I strongly believe that such efforts will continue with the organization of more such events, which aim toward the lightening of our relationships. It should be mentioned how important the relationship between the Greek and the Israeli community has been over the years, and how it continues to develop and grow each day. This is why we are all gathered here today, to promote not only the relationship among us, but also bridge our differences and contribute on our side to the American society by promoting peace and cooperation. I'm convinced that both Israel and Greece can play a vital role in the Middle East as well, in the process of democratization and promotion of peaceful procedures. The democracy of Israel and Greece will together encourage the stabilization of the area. In closing, I want to extend my humblest thanks and appreciation for your continuous efforts to promote and support the values that we each hold near and dear to our hearts. Thank you.
It's now my special pleasure to introduce His Eminence, Methodios, Metropolitan of Boston, who is the spiritual leader. You don't want me to skip all of it? Okay, he's a great guy.
When I have an opportunity, especially on Sundays, to address congregations, I always say, my brothers and sisters in the household of God, and I say this with all my heart tonight, because I feel that I am in the presence of brothers and sisters of the household of God. Bob Leikind came to the podium first and said exactly what I was going to say, as did Mrs. Katsarou. Really, it's a beautiful evening of fellowship, I believe, and an opportunity for us to, as we prepare for the celebration of Hanukkah and Christmas, to be together, to listen to these two renowned scholars who will make their presentations in a few moments, to learn more about our traditions, our history, and how we have gotten to where we are here in the year 2011. Father George and Professor Cohen, I'm sure will inspire all of us. I want to express my gratitude to Bob Leikind, who really is, permit me to say, Bob, the spirit and the driving force that has kept us together all this time, together with all of your staff. I'm deeply appreciative, and I want you to know that my community is most respectful, and thank God for you and the Jewish community here in Greater Boston. So enjoy the evening, enjoy the music, but no dancing until we get outside.
I disagree with His Eminence cautiously. But in fact, this has been a partnership all the way. And one of the people who has been most instrumental in this partnership has been Father Demetrius Methodios, who is an extraordinary leader and inspired. I just heard him give a 2,000-year history in 15 minutes, and he pulled it off with clarity and precision. He is the pastor of the Texarkana Archangels Greek Orthodox Church in Watertown and an ecumenical officer of the Greek Orthodox Metropolis of Boston. He's a graduate of the Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology, where he earned the degrees of Master of Divinity and Master of Theology. Father Methodios also recently received his PhD from Boston College, where he studies focused from Jewish-Christian relations in general and the early church Jewish-Christian relations in particular. He is an extraordinarily gifted leader, scholar, and we're very lucky to have him here with us tonight. Thank you.
You know, looking out at all the people here, I'm reminded of Rob Schneider in Jaws when he said, "We're going to need a bigger boat." And I think next time we're going to need a bigger boat. Given the success of the last presentation on Passover and Pascha, the decision to follow up with one on Hanukkah was a very easy one to make, given the cognate points that exist between the Jewish and Greek Orthodox understanding of this historical and religious event. We are truly blessed this evening to have two distinguished scholars speak tonight on the topic of Greeks, Jews, and Hanukkah, a story that still needs to be told. This was Rob's idea too. He liked that title, so it's his. And he was a big force in pulling this off. And to help us understand how the events of Hanukkah are part of our shared inheritance. Our two speakers tonight are two very distinguished and respected scholars in their fields. Shaye J.D. Cohen is the Littauer Professor of Hebrew Literature and Philosophy in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations of Harvard University. Before arriving at Harvard in July 2001, Professor Cohen was for 10 years the Professor of Judaic Studies and Professor of Religious Studies at Brown University. Professor Cohen began his career at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where he was ordained and for many years was the Dean of the Graduate School and Schenkman Professor of Jewish History. He received his PhD in Ancient History with distinction from Columbia University in 1975. And he also appears in many footnotes throughout my papers in my also appearing not only in my footnotes, but throughout my academic career, I was his teaching assistant, is Father George Dragas, Professor of Patristics at the Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology in Brookline. He has taught Patristics and Orthodox Theology at Durham University in England from 1974 to 1995 and directed dozens of graduate students in academic research at the master's and PhD level. In 1995, he came to Holy Cross as Dean and Professor of Patristics and Church History. He also served as acting president of Holy Cross and ecumenical officer of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. At present, he is also a visiting professor at the Faculty of Theology of Balaman University in Lebanon, Sherbrooke Université, and Laval Université in Quebec, Canada, where he teaches master's and doctoral courses in Orthodox theology and directs doctoral students. His role in this and other such venues is very valued and important because he also serves as a chief ecumenical officer for the Patriarchate of Jerusalem and represents the Patriarch, who is also his student at a variety of events throughout what we always are, Father George. And so we are indeed blessed and honored to have two distinguished scholars such as this address us tonight, and we ask for your profound and deep attention.
I'm not, of course, heaven forbid, referring to anybody in this room or to their immediate ancestors. I am, of course, referring to the Greeks of old, sometimes called pagans, sometimes called Hellenes. They go by different names, but our sources often call them Greeks. So if I do that, please understand I'm not referring to contemporary Greeks. Sorry, not necessarily referring to contemporary Greeks. Okay, let's briefly talk about the events that brought about the festival of Hanukkah. As you know from your high school history, in 323 BC, 333, 334 BCE, Alexander the Great began his conquest from mainland Greece, technically from Macedonia, into Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, and then from there into Syria, into the land of Israel, into Egypt, and then back up, swinging through then into the lands of Asia. The great conquest of Alexander the Great. From this point onward, Judea, like everything else for miles around, was a province, colony, a territory, right, run by part of large Hellenistic empires. Large Hellenistic empires. We call them Hellenistic because they are fundamentally Hellenic in character. Their language is Greek. People are speaking Greek. The government is all speaking Greek. The officials are ethnically Greek or Macedonian. Their language and culture are Greek. But of course, the peoples of these large, vast areas still maintain their own ethnicity, their own languages, and their own ways of life. So everything goes along, bubbles along quietly for a couple of centuries. We don't hear much going on except for wars, incessant wars and battles between the rival Greek, Hellenistic generals, each of whom, of course, is trying to increase the size of their empire at the expense of their neighbors. And these battles go on, and Judea is located strategically between Egypt to the south and Syria to the north, and is consequently a field of battle between the Syrians to the north who are trying to conquer it on the way to Egypt, and the Egyptians in the south who are trying to push back into Syria. So throughout the 3rd century BCE, the 200s, there are an incessant series of wars, until finally, in the year 200 or so BCE, Judea is captured for the final last time by the Hellenistic kings of Syria, right, known as the Seleucids. Now, sometimes you see in textbooks they're called Syrian, but trust me on this, the Seleucids are as Syrian as I am, right? They don't have an ounce of Syrian blood in them. They speak Greek. The language is Greek, and the Macedonian imperialist class, of course, only married each other. They wouldn't, heaven forbid, marry the natives. So this is good old-fashioned imperialism, good old-fashioned colonialism. Judea is part now of the Seleucid Empire, the empire headquartered in Syria and points east. Everything continues along quietly. We don't hear about any problems. There are no rebellions, no revolts, no persecutions, no nothing, just as there hadn't been for centuries. Until something dramatic begins to happen in the 170s BCE. One can see turmoil and unrest. And in the 160s, boom, we have an explosion. And the events happen rapidly one after the other, and modern scholars to this day still trying to figure out who pushed whom first, who did what to whom first, how to disentangle this series of very complicated events. The chronology is very, very uncertain, and the causality is uncertain. I do not understand why events transpired the way they did. But the important thing is the big picture is, stepping back for a moment, we have going on in the 160s BCE, the Judeans versus the Hellenistic kings, armies of Syria. We have, on the one hand, a religious persecution. The religious persecution takes place both in the Temple of Jerusalem and in the countryside. In the Temple of Jerusalem, our texts tell us the temple is profaned, quote unquote, is polluted, quote unquote. Some obscene cult object is brought into the Temple of Jerusalem and put right on or next to the very altar. If you go to Hebrew school, they told you it was a statue. It's not clear if it was a statue. The reference to a statue in the sanctuary appears for the first time in Jerome, who lived centuries after the event. So some obscene cult object, called the abomination of desolation in the book of Daniel, right, was established in the temple, right smack dab in the middle of the temple, and we are told the rites of the temple were profaned, were sacrilege took place in the temple. Outside the temple in the countryside, there is some kind of organized effort by the king to see to it that the Jews do bow down to statues, eat forbidden foods, violate the Sabbath, don't circumcise their children, and so on. This has sometimes been said to be the first ever war in the history of the world that arose in response to a religious persecution. We don't understand what on earth Antiochus Epiphanes, the Greek king of Syria, was thinking. What did he hope to accomplish by doing this? And what on earth? Well, just explain it. The events such as these are unparalleled in the ancient world. In the ancient pre-Christian world, events such as these are unparalleled. So, how did the Jews react to this extraordinary series of events? Attacking an attack both on the temple, its priesthood, its cult, its worship, and also religiosity out in the world, out in the country. Well, our text shows us there are several different responses by the various groups in Judea. On the one extreme we have, we might call collaborationists. Jews who were going along with the king. Whatever the king says is the law. So we go along with the king. In fact, some modern scholars have even argued, amazingly enough, that the brains behind this persecution were the Jews themselves, or at least some group within the Jews, were trying very hard to compel their brethren to become modern. Hey, it's the 2nd century BCE, it's time to get modern, loosen up. Time to abandon some of our old-fashioned ways, which don't work anymore in the 2nd century BCE. Our youth is alienated, etc., that sort of way. So it has been suggested. So there was a group of Jews in Judea who were collaborationists, who were working together with the king, apparently. We don't understand exactly how far they would have gone. You mean they were working with the king to profane the temple? It doesn't make too much sense. Well, so the mysteries abound. But there clearly were groups of Jews who were allied with the temple, with the king, and the king's officials. At the other extreme, you have Jews who are prepared to die for the law. And some of them actually did die for the law. It's the first time in Jewish history we hear about martyrs. In fact, one could argue the first time in human history we hear about martyrs. Depends upon how you define what exactly what a martyr is. So we have the famous set of stories. I'm sorry. In some circles they're very famous, but alas, those circles are not very big. The famous set of stories in the 2nd book of Maccabees, chapters 6 and 7. We have the wonderful story of Eleazar, the aged priest, and an even more wonderful story of the woman and her 7 sons. Right? All of whom consciously, deliberately, unafraid, look at death and say, I choose death rather than violate the law. To you it's a trivial thing to eat this bowl of forbidden meat, but for me it's not trivial, I refuse, even though I know death will ensue. So we see Jews such as these, who are resisting unto death in the face of these extraordinary challenges. We have other kinds of Jews who are resisting differently, and I want to make that clear. Martyrdom is a kind of resistance. Martyrdom is a way of fighting. It's not passive. It's not quietistic. It's active. The martyr is fighting back against the persecutor. There are other Jews, though, who thought that fighting back by getting killed is not an efficient mode of resistance. Right? They thought the way to fight back is to run off into the wilderness and to form guerrilla bands and, fight. Stones, arrows, spears, fight. And of course, the most famous of these bands, and apparently were several, again our sources are not very clear, but one band emerges as the dominant, as the leader of this resistance activity, and that of course is our hero, Judah the Maccabee. Judah the Maccabee, right, one of 5 sturdy early sons, produced by one Mattathias, right, they begin in the countryside, not in the city, not in Jerusalem, out in the countryside, in Modin. They apparently are a local family. They're not part of the Jerusalem establishment. This group, this clan, emerges as the leaders of those who are going to fight for the law. And they begin as guerrilla fighters. And amazingly enough, they are successful. It is they who lead the fight, win small skirmishes, larger skirmishes, win some battles, and amazingly enough, triumph. And the climax of this part of the story is the Hasmoneans entering the temple of Jerusalem, re-purifying it, re-establishing the old order of worship, restoring the old calendar and the old festival cycle, etc., the laws of purity, and putting the true priests back on the job, and restoring the temple just the way it was. And the holiday we have to celebrate this great Maccabean victory is, class, Hanukkah. Right. On the 25th day, yeah, I know, it's odd coincidence. Yeah, the 25th day, the month of the winter solstice, yeah, it's a big coincidence, yeah. And you celebrate by lighting lamps and fire, yeah, I know. But that's, maybe it's another time, we can talk about that. So that's the festival of Hanukkah, the 25th day of Kislev, in which we celebrate the great victory of the Maccabees, Judah Maccabee and his party, in reconquering, repurifying the temple. There's one more response I can mention too, which I should have mentioned earlier, but I wasn't looking at my notes, which is that there were other Jews who responded by basically dreaming. Here's a time of crisis. What should we do? The answer is, I don't know what to do. But I think this is the end, capital E. This is the end of the world. Surely the temples, the heavens will open up and fiery chariots will come down, and this will be the end of history. Events so catastrophic, so cataclysmic, surely deserve an unusual kind of response, so they betoken something. We know about such Jews from the book of Daniel. It's found in the Hebrew Bible. The book of Daniel was written, composed, edited, compiled, I'm not sure exactly what word to use, during these events of the 160s BCE. And as far as the author of Daniel is concerned, these events mark the end of history. He describes these events very precisely until right near the end of the book, when he is convinced that this is it. The heavens will open up, the dead will be resurrected, there'll be some cataclysm. He was wrong, it turns out. We're still here, right? But one assumes there are other Jews who felt the same way. What did the Hasmoneans do after the great victory? I use Hasmoneans and Maccabees indistinguishably. If you want to know the difference, ask me later. So what did the Hasmoneans and Maccabees do after their great victory? Well, you would have thought that they would lay down their arms and stop. After all, they went to fight for the law. They went to fight to put an end to the persecution. They went to fight to restore the temple, to regain the temple, to put the priesthood and the purity rules back into effect. You would have thought after Hanukkah, 164 BCE, 25th day of Kislev, 164 BCE, they had won. They had gotten everything they were set out to achieve. You would have thought, now it's time to go home, go back to the farm. But now some other mysterious something goes on, which we don't fully understand. They kept fighting. What will ultimately emerge over the next 30 years, not from Judah himself, the last who gets killed in battle in 161 BCE, but further down, what will emerge is a new state, an independent state, with the Maccabees themselves in charge. Not Judah himself, but his brother, and then ultimately his brother's sons. The line continues from Judah's nephews. So, from this guerrilla band fighting for the law to restore the temple and freedom of worship, we wind up with a Maccabean state, which then has its own ups and downs, rise and falls. She's a very quick arc. She's a height around the year 100 or so BCE. It's at its utmost. And 63 BCE, it's all over when the Romans come to town. That's the brief trajectory, brief arc of the events of Hanukkah. One very interesting thing about Hanukkah is, aside from the events themselves, which are quite fascinating, is what it means. or the different meanings that people see in Hanukkah? Or what meanings we extract from the story? What does the story of Hanukkah mean? And here I'll just treat briefly 3 responses, and then more later if you like. One response would be a kind of Zionist reading, or the reading that you would get in Israeli public schools. Right, what is that? Hasmoneans throw off our foreign yoke, foreign oppressor, right? Here we are in our homeland, in our national homeland, right? And the Jews, of course, cannot tolerate foreign rule in their own homeland. So we throw off foreign yoke, and the Hasmoneans go on to fame, fortune, and victory. And the first thing they do is to establish an independent state. I would call that an Israeli nationalist reading of the story, where the story is understood in nationalist terms, and the great victory of the Hasmoneans is precisely a great victory for Jewish nationalism. Have our own state and our own homeland. And of course, there is something on which to rely in this reading of the story, because the Hasmoneans did establish a state. What that leaves out, of course, that leaves out from what all of our texts emphasize, is of course the divine or the miraculous element. All of our sources, both 1 Maccabees and 2 Maccabees, 2 books that are found in the Apocrypha. Hold that thought for a second. Footnote, class. Books in the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha means these are not found in our Hebrew Bible. So don't go home and take out your Jewish study Bible. You will not find the books in the Apocrypha. But the Jewish Bible does not have apocryphal books. The Christian Bible has apocryphal books. Again, it depends which Christian Bible you're talking about. But in any case, these are part of the Christian Bible. The key thing to remember is the books of the Apocrypha are, all of them, Jewish books. All of them are written by Jews in antiquity, some in Hebrew, some in Greek, right? But they're all written by Jewish authors, even though we, Jews, lost the Apocryphal books when we went over to only biblical books in Hebrew, thank you. We don't want anything else. We lost the Apocryphal books and relied upon Christians to preserve them, which they did. And now we Jews can read them still, thanks to our Christian brethren who preserved them for us. But they are Jewish books, so therefore they are kosher to read. Have no fear. Okay. Back to where I was. Back to where I was in the text. So 1 Maccabee, 2 Maccabees. These are our main sources for these events. And then a sort of other sources. They all emphasize the miraculous, theological aspect of the story. Right? It was God who brought about these dramatic, catastrophic events. And it was God who ultimately led Judah and or his successors to great victory. So one thing left out in the Israeli national narrative is precisely this divine element. The element that God is directing these events in his own inscrutable way. So another version, I would say, would be an opposite to that, which is the one that emphasizes the miraculous above all others and suppresses everything else. And that's the version that you might have heard in Hebrew school. Right? The version which says that, why do we celebrate Hanukkah? Well, it's because when the Hasmoneans defeated the Greeks, the bad Greeks, when the Hasmoneans defeated the Greeks and reclaimed the temple, that's all by way of introduction. Now comes the real story. So they only found 1 cruse of oil, and it was impure. All the oils were made impure by the Greeks. They couldn't use them to relight the lamps and and it takes a week to send to Amazon to get pure oil, and the time to buy. It's a whole week goes by. So what are you going to do? So they thought they were in a pickle. So they lit the lamp with the 1 cruse of oil that they had left. Right, thinking it would last for 1 day, and miraculously it lasted 8 days. And that's why we have a festival of Hanukkah for 8 days. Now, it's a wonderful little story. I'm not sure it's the best way to teach Hanukkah to children, but okay. The point of the story, surely though, is to say Hanukkah is about a miracle, period. The great victory of the Hasmoneans is only by way of prologue. By way of introduction. It sort of sets up the story. But the story itself has nothing to do with the Hasmoneans. The story itself has to do with a cruise of oil, which of course is entirely in divine hands. In that version, there's no nationalism, there's no state, there's barely any conflict at all. What you're left with is a miracle story, pure and simple. That's what Hanukkah is about, and that reading of the story. Now, of course, that reading of the story leaves out all those other things, which are also part of the story. So then I'd like to tell you now my last and my concluding point, which is, you're ready for it now, class, the true meaning of Hanukkah. You're supposed to laugh at that, all right. I would say, what do we modern American Jews get out of the story? I would argue that the lesson for us modern American Jews get out of the story is that the Maccabees learned how to negotiate the challenge of living in the world with Greeks, or we would say perhaps Gentiles, which the power on the block is the Seleucid Empire, and we Jews have to negotiate living with the Seleucid Empire, with the Greeks. But negotiate doesn't mean we're going to surrender everything. On the contrary, the Maccabees show there's a point comes we have to draw the line when you say, no, we can't do it. Right? Certain aspects of our identity are too essential to compromise. When it comes to the temple and its worship, no compromise. You can't mess around with my temple. When it comes to our ritual observances, we can't compromise. We have circumcision, Sabbath, food laws. Those are essential. We can't compromise. But once you get past that, as long as the essential is preserved, and what that essential is, I leave for you to fill in the blanks, but as long as one preserves that which is essential, then the Hasmoneans say, of course we can be Hellenized as much as anybody. We like Greek culture. We just need to make sure we can control it. So the classic example of that, with this I conclude, the classic example of that is the Hasmonean proclamation of the festival of Hanukkah. So where does Hanukkah come from? It's an annual festival celebrating the great victory over the Greeks. And where does Hanukkah come from? The story is told in both 1 Maccabees and 2 Maccabees. The Hasmoneans and their party, proclaim a festival. And they establish a festival for 8 days annually to celebrate the great victory over the Greeks. So class, where did the Hasmoneans get this crazy idea that we, the Jewish people, have the political power, authority, to establish a festival by fiat?
The Greek idea.
Greek idea. You don't get it from the Bible. The festivals in the Bible don't come that way. Moses gives the Israelites a calendar. King David did not establish a festival for conquering the city of Jerusalem. Joshua did not establish a festival for conquering the land of Canaan. We don't get festivals that way. But somehow the Maccabees have this amazing idea that we, Jewish people in conclave assembled, we can decide we want the festival. Not only that, but the festival we decide we want is going to be an annual festival to commemorate a great victory. We have no other festival like that. But no, except for Purim and Esther. Well, that's me later. Back to right? We don't have that, those festivals of that kind. And the reason is that the political idea that the people have the power to establish a festival, and in turn we want a festival to commemorate a great victory, just as the Greeks did every year after the great battle over the Persians, with that annual festival of Delphi every year among the Greeks to celebrate the great victory over the Persians. Well, that idea comes to the Maccabees from the Greeks. And that's perfectly fine. That doesn't threaten Judaism, that enriches it. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.
That's a difficulty for me. For those who told me, professors are like this. We're all the same. We all make the same, especially if you know a lot and you don't know which one to say and how much to say. Isn't that right? So I was following you in every step, and I was agreeing with what you were saying, and I simply hope to add a few more things to give the story from the Greek side. Good evening, everybody. May the Lord bless us all during these holy days, the Jews with Hanukkah and the Greeks with Hanukkah. That's the program. Greeks, Jews, and Hanukkah. And I want to start with a remark. Somebody phoned me and said, I saw something, an announcement, Father George, you're celebrating Greek Hanukkah? What does that mean? Oh, it means a lot of things, I said. You will come to the meeting and you'll learn all about it. There was another academic colleague who made a different comment. He said, he said, it used to be, because there is an ancient statue representing synagogue and ecclesia, which you may know, those who are art historians, they know that these were popular in the early centuries of Christianity, in the Roman world, that synagoga had bound to ecclesia. So synagoga was blindfolded, holding almost as if it was enslaved, and ecclesia was very powerful, the crown and so on, that it had somehow succeeded synagoga. And he said to me, don't you know this? Actually, he sent me a picture with this and said, now are you going to subject ecclesia to synagoga? So are you going to reverse by celebrating Greek Hanukkah? I said, well, come and hear what I'm going to say. Pardon? No, he's not here. But I'm going to tell him. Because he was very keen to know what I was going to say. I want to say, first of all, that we can't separate Greeks from Jews. History, if we look at the history in a greater perspective, and not just in the particular perspective that Professor Cohen said this, we cannot, as we are today, and not only us, but the whole world. If we look at humanity in general, and we look at the modern developments in human history, you cannot separate Greeks and Jews. The Hellenization of the Jews was a very important thing, otherwise there would be no Christianity. If the Greeks had not Hellenized Jews, and if the Jews had not been Hellenized, then the Jewish tradition, which is so critical for human history, certainly for Christians, certainly for Jews, and certainly for many other people, would not have taken place. Usually, if you want to say what is the difference between Jews and Christians, and my students ask me as a patristic scholar, how do the fathers see the difference between the Jewish interpretation of the Bible and the Christian interpretation of the Bible? And I say, well, there's only one little thing. The Jews find Israel as the key to interpreting the Old Testament. And that is the Israel of God, the people of God. Not all Israel is Israel, but those who are faithful. And the history of the Old Testament is a religious history, is not just secular history, is not general history about the people, but the people with a calling, called by God, being the servants of God, and therefore all the faithful Jews are the ones who parade in the pages of the Old Testament. Now these are actually, in the Christian sense, in the Greek Christian, the Greek Orthodox tradition, all these great figures of faith in the Old Testament are saints. And we celebrate them. They're ours. You can't be Greek, Christian, Orthodox, and not to accept Moses, Abraham, and so on, and all the saints of Israel. And not only the ones mentioned in the canonical books. The second set of books that we talked about tonight, Professor Cohen, the Hellenistic books, because they didn't survive. Certainly, First Maccabees was written in Hebrew, but it survived in a Greek translation. And Second Maccabees probably was written in Greek, and third in Greek, and fourth in Greek, but by Jews. And these, although they are called Apocrypha today, they were not Apocrypha when they were first written. and the Christians did not receive them as apocrypha. They, because of later developments, and there are many open questions in scholarship about these things. When did they become apocrypha? I can tell you that in one of the big events among the Orthodox, at present, among the Orthodox churches, which bring together many different churches, ethnicities, ethnic churches, one of the main points in the agenda of the so-called Great and Holy Council of the Eastern Orthodox churches, which is forthcoming and has reached its end after 30 or 40 years of preparation. One of the major points in the agenda is the books of the Bible. What are canonical? What are not canonical? What about the Apocrypha? Because there are different views. Certainly in the Greek Bible, the Greek Old Testament, or the first part of the Bible, which is Jewish, we include also the first three Maccabees. Maccabees 1, 2, 3, not the fourth, but the fourth is included in many very famous codices like Alexandrinus and so on. So they are actually part of the scriptures, the sacred scriptures that we receive from the Jews. And they are to be read. That is something that now has actually made many modern scholars in the West, non-Orthodox, to include these in publications of the Bible with Apocrypha. And not only the Apocrypha that are accepted in the West as sort of books that are to be read, but actually they include even the fourth book. And I was looking at my books. I spent a day trying to read a lot of things, and then I said, what am I going to say? There are so many things about Hanukkah and about the connections between the Jews, the Greeks, and not only in the past, but today. Because we stand today and we want to look at the past, but look at it in order to assess not only the past, but to assess it in the light of the present. We need to have history in front of us. I come back to what I said earlier. What is the difference in the approach of the books of the Bible, of the Hebrew books, by Jews and by Christians? There's only one thing: Israel, the people of God, the faithful people of God, not the nation simply of Israel, but those who are the highlights of the nation, what we call the saints, the holy people, those who responded to the word of God. And indeed, that's where the Maccabees come in. The Maccabees continue, and not only in Old Testament times, in ancient times, before the Common Era or what, in the Hellenistic era and after the Hellenistic era, there are many Jews who continue responding to the word of God as it was given to them in the covenants. The covenants of Abraham, the covenants, all the covenants that you are all familiar with, and indeed as we also receive them and we believe in them and we don't see them as something which we oppose. So, what is the difference? It's Israel, the people of God. And what do the Christians do? They also have the people of God, the faithful. That's why they make the faithful people in the sacred scriptures of the Jews important for them, and they follow them, they celebrate their memories, and they celebrate them in the context of their understanding. It was interesting what Professor Cohen said. According to Daniel, certainly according to the second book of Maccabees, almost you might say, the author does he have the Christian developments in mind? I wonder, because he talks about resurrection, he talks about the end of the world. And the end of the world, in fact, according to the Christian view, has come, but not fully come. There is an end that came with the destruction of Jerusalem and with the foundation of the Christian church in Jerusalem, because the Christians also left from there. For us, Jerusalem is Jerusalem indestructible, because Jerusalem on earth and in history is only an image of Jerusalem in heaven. And that is the church is not only on earth among human beings, as the fathers explained to us, and indeed as when you start analyzing the different interpretations of the scriptures, Jewish and Christian, you find that the church has an eternal basis in God's own existence. For God designed it, God designed the world. The church is the people of God. The church is the
true image of the world. And the human being is the pinnacle of the creation because it is made in such a way that it includes both the first creation of the angels, the spiritual world, the world in heaven, the church in heaven, and also the world, the visible world in which we live. The human being participates in both. And in that sense, the human being is the pinnacle. Now, what has that to do with Hanukkah? It has to do a lot with it. I read all kinds of things, and I had here, I just wanted to write some of the most important points, which I underlined. One of the things that I found in a book that I like very much, and I use it many times, the Jewish Festivals, History and Observance. You probably know this. Yes, it's a classic book. Now that says on Hanukkah that it is not, let me read one little thing. Hanukkah is observed for 8 days. That's very important for the Christians. I don't know how you interpret the 8 days, but for us, 8 days is extremely important. It's Jewish, definitely, but it is the fulfillment of Judaism, or the first end and the first fulfillment of Judaism, which came with Christianity as we understand it, and we participate on this. When a child is born, on the 8th day, we observe the giving of a name, and the child is brought to the church, which church for us Orthodox is called the temple. Where do we take it from? Everything. And the 8th day and the temple all comes from the Jewish tradition. So it says, now that's Hanukkah. It is Hanukkah. Is observed for 8 days, beginning with the 25th day, as you said, of the month Kislev, which is the 25th of December. There are all kinds of theories among liturgists and scholars about the origin of the Christian date for the birth of Christ, of Jesus Christ. In other words, the 25th. How did they arrive at this? Indeed, how did the feast of Christmas originate? It's late. It's 4th century. In some places, 6th century in the East. Is it Jewish tradition that brought it out? Usually, they look for pagan feasts. When the early Christians were persecuted as a Jewish sect, actually, because the slaves who were Jews and Greeks and Easterners who were brought to Rome, the first church in Rome, in the center of the Roman Empire, was Greek-speaking for a long time, because it was the slaves who came from the East, whether they were Jews or Greeks or whatever, they were Christians, and they were regarded as a Jewish sect. And that's why they were persecuted, because they were not actually legally acknowledged by the Jewish people in the Roman state. But they were actually a Jewish sect. So, I don't want to go into details. I want to say this. It is not one of the great Jewish festivals and bears no aura of sanctity. Well, I want to make it clear that it does bear a fantastic aura of sanctity. That is a very great feast. And when you celebrate it, I will give you some insights how, as a Greek, I would celebrate Hanukkah. As I told my friend, and I tried to tell him, and I said, I'll tell you a lot more afterwards. So, because I was reading, and I was thinking, pondering, and I was putting down too many points to explain to him, and I'm afraid I can't explain them all to you, but I hope I'll succeed in a few more minutes to point out some of the things following on what Professor Cohen said. Because there are two ways of understanding the feast. Is it what the state of Israel has actually established, and we know that modern history, it was established as a national feast by fiat, you said. Who said it? It's not in the scriptures. It is in the uncanonical books, the events about the rededication of the temple and the miracle of the oil and the 8 lights that are lit up. The whole thing was based not on the canonical scriptures of the Jews, but it was actually understood, which means that the state of Israel and the people of Israel had taken these books written by Hellenistic Jews very seriously, especially the modern Greek state. And there is a parallel between the state of Israel today and the state of the Hasmoneans, which was recovered just for a little while, because after, I like seeing the history of Israel as a whole, to the present. Nothing actually in the history of Israel is different from the history of the church. And that is something I always say. What the Jews suffered, the Christians have suffered. It is just a repetition, and there is a connection between the two, which is unbelievable. That's why I started with a statement that Greeks and Jews cannot be separated. For us, of course, there is a very important phrase in the New Testament, in the greatest of the apostles, who was Jewish, Paul, the apostle, who was actually very Jewish, a rabbi, who was against the Christians, who persecuted the Christians, then suddenly, miraculously, he was converted to Christianity, and without him, as all scholars acknowledge, Christianity wouldn't be the same. In fact, some of the scholars, Christian scholars today, who want to find Christianity, there's no continuity, historic continuity in them, as there is in the Greeks. They try to find the origins, and they provide all kinds of speculations about Paul and Jesus. Is Christianity created by Jesus or by Paul? Is Jesus, as we know him in Christianity, created by Paul, a rabbi, and so on and so forth? I'm sure that you are familiar with some of these things, as we all are. So, coming back to what St. Paul says, salvation for whom? Is for the Jew first, and also for the Greek. That's a very important statement. Why does he make this like this? This is a Jew, says salvation is for the Jew first, and also for the Greek. Because there will be no church without Judaism. There will be no people of God, for that's what salvation is all about. It's the rededication of humanity to God. That's how we understand Christianity. And that we have received from the Jews. The rededication of the temple, which is the center of, and the miracle of the lamp that was lit up because the lamp was taken captive by the Seleucids, which was the golden sevenfold candlestick. It was taken. So they made another one because they rededicated the temple. They removed the pagan statue of Zeus, which had been put in by Antiochus in the church. And they cleaned the church and they put a new menorah. And this one was made of copper, because they were impoverished at that time. All the gold had been taken by the Seleucids. And you must not think of the Greeks as being just the Seleucids, and the Jews just being those Jews who fought those Greeks. Because there are many other Jews, and there were many other Greeks, who had many different relations. In all relations, that's a very important thing that I was pondering as I was reading. Who are the Jews who produced the Maccabean stories? The first, the second, third, fourth. The third is based on the fourth, on the first, and the fourth is based on the second. There are all kinds of interesting things, because the fourth is a reflection on the spiritual meaning, and that's a very valuable thing. That's why it is included in the Greek Bible. In our Bible, it is included, and now everybody is listening more to the fourth, which for some people is a completely Hellenized Judaism. No, it isn't, because it depends on how you interpret it, how you understand it. So how do we understand it? I am not going to repeat about the story. I just want to say again that for us, the importance of the foundation of a new state of Israel, a small one, of Jewish actually, it wasn't Israel, it was Judaism, of Judah, by the Hasmoneans, didn't really survive. What survived was the impact of the Jewish captivity upon the Greeks, and through the Greeks upon the rest of the world. And that came from Egypt actually, which is astonishing, because we have, in the Greek period, in the Hellenistic period of the Jewish captivity, before the Hasmonean state was created for a little while, for 100 years maybe, until the Romans captured it, it was like a little state between the rival states of the Diadochi, of the successors of Alexander the Great. In the first part of that period, the Hellenistic period, the Jewish people were under the Ptolemies in Egypt. And there were no bad relations. That's where Greek and Jewish things were so well done That's where the scriptures were translated, and indeed we have older Greek texts than Hebrew texts. The Greek translations, that's why in Israel I have some friends there, because I'm connected with the Patriarchate and many friends. They study in the university, and the scholars there, the Jewish scholars, study the Hebrew and the Greek of the Old Testament together, because the Greek is very valuable, in as much as it is based on ancient Greek text, Hebrew texts, which we don't have. And some of the discoveries in the Dead Sea Scrolls and elsewhere, in the Cairo Geniza and so on, which predate the Christian era, they actually comply in many points with the Greek translations, which are very old and very ancient. On the texts, yes, there is an absolute relation between the two. On the interplay between Greek civilization, culture, and Jewish faith, very much so, because the Greek people have never been the same again after they became Christians. And they became Christians not in the way that Western Christians are. Because there's a different way of appropriation between the Roman, the Latin West, and the Greek East. There's a different appropriation. Of course, there is a lot in common among the Christians. But Eastern Christianity is closer to Judaism, as I have always said, because Western Christianity, as I have always tried to explain to Jewish friends, tries to find an inner core within Judaism. So it reduces it to an inner core. Whereas Western Christianity embraces it all, but reinterprets it all. You have the temple, you have the feasts, there's no feast, the saints, everything is adopted completely, but is given a different interpretation, and it is aligned to new saints who are also in the same people of God. We don't actually speak of two Israels, the old and the new. There's no new Israel. The church is Israel. It's an extension of Israel. And that's how we understand ourselves, and that's why I made this statement, and that's why I celebrate the Maccabees. Now, who are the Maccabees? I suppose that if you celebrate the Hasmonean victory of a few heroes, that sounds very Greek to me, against the Syrians, you know, if that is the thing, then you celebrate the foundation of a Jewish state, which lasted only for a little while, and then it was dismantled by the Romans. And actually so badly that the Romans prohibited the Jewish people from returning to Jerusalem. In the year, was it 135 or something, a law was produced by the Romans that they were not allowed to return to the Holy City. Therefore, the Jews today celebrate the fact that they are back and that they are in the Holy City. And that's why we have all these tensions, because they want the whole city. Is this, and I have a very interesting article by a Jewish scholar asking, is this what the state of Israel should be doing? Trying to do what the Hasmoneans did at that time? In the huge world in which we live, neither Greeks nor Jews, we are, from a state point of view, we are rather small. But from a cultural point of view, from a faith point of view, we're much larger than the world. Especially if we could understand one another in another way. That we are not enemies, that we are friends, and that the Christians are an extension of the Jewish people. Israel. One of my favorite fathers, who has written the best sermons on the Maccabees, on the feast of the Maccabees that we celebrate on the 1st of August, St. John Chrysostom, an Antiochian, actually, a Syrian, a Greek, whatever his racial background must have been. He was Greek in speech, and he was a master of the Greek language. Sometimes they say that he was anti-Semitic, not at all. He was the most Jewish of all, if you look at him from another way, and not from the point of view of antiparenthesis, contradistinction that many scholars like to do. Because that's what happens. In any relation, you either have positive relations, which develop, or you have negative relations, and the negative comes from both sides. You can have people who don't want a relation, but in fact they are related, even in a negative sense. So, St. John Chrysostom called Byzantium, Constantinople, the holy city of the Eastern Christians. He called it Jerusalem. And he wanted to change it to Jerusalem. And his presence was so powerful about this so that when he left, he was exiled because he tried to put the faith as the basis for the social life of the people. They said, Jerusalem has left with John Chrysostom. That's how close the Christian and the Jewish traditions are interlocked. And we need to look much more openly, to discuss more openly, to listen to each other without fear how things are. And I'm aware in reading the Fathers that the Hellenistic Judaism of the first stage, of the stage of the Egyptian, the Ptolemaic period, not the Seleucid period, which was different with the Jews. Professor Cohen referred to the Seleucids. He focused, of course, on the particular history of the Hasmoneans and the Maccabees and Judah Maccabeus, who reacted against the inhuman, irreligious, pagan laws of the Seleucids, of Antiochus. But if you focus on the Ptolemies, things are very different. And if you focus on the other Greek-Jewish relation of the first part, that's very different. That's the one that has lasted a lot, and to this day, it's very valuable for both Jews and Greeks. I want to finish. I think I'm not there. I have to complete my half hour, 3 minutes. I want to say 3 things. If we do not focus for Hanukkah on the ethnic, national revival of Judah, of the kingdom of Judah, but we focus on the faith that is embedded in it, as Professor Cohen, I think, said it also, the meaning of the feast. And that's exactly what all these sermons that we have for many fathers, starting very early in the 2nd century, in 3rd century by Cyprian, 3rd century by Cyprian of Carthage, in the northern Africa, and also by St. John Chrysostom, by St. Ambrose in Milan. Everywhere we have ancient sermons analyzing the significance of the Maccabees. Who? They were the martyrs. Not the winners of the battle, but those who sacrificed themselves. And what is the meaning of sacrifice? That characterizes the Jewish people much more than the victories throughout their history. And that's what characterizes Christianity. They say, Jewish exegetes say that who is the suffering servant of the Lord? Israel. And of course it is. But for us Christians, the whole story of Israel is consummated in Jesus in a paradoxical way, and that's what makes us also follow this extension of the suffering people of God in the world. Why do we suffer? And why do we celebrate suffering? I mean, this is what the feast of the Maccabees for us is all about. And that is exactly what is related to Hanukkah for us. The people who fought those pagan Greeks, the Seleucids, emphasized the Torah and the temple. They refused to break the law according to the Seleucid demands, in other words, to secularize their faith or to mingle it with paganism, and they refused to accept the desecration of the temple. They fought for these two things, for the Word of God, which was the essence of their faith, and for God's presence. I could illustrate this from the documents, and these are actually very much so written in the Synaxaria, the brief accounts of the feast of the Maccabees in our liturgical books, when they emphasize precisely the faith of these people who actually prefigure Jesus Christ, and they prefigure him before he appeared, whereas Christians who suffered afterwards as Christians, as Jewish heretics among the pagans, had already an example, but they didn't have an example. They were the example. So there is something amazing here, and that is praised by all why this is a very significant feast. If you sacrifice your life, if you spend your life, whether you're an individual or whether you are a people, whether you're Jewish or whether you're Greek, for God's word and for God's presence in the temple, then that is what constitutes the greatest feast in humanity. Because that is what opens up the mystery of the oil and the light. What enlightens humanity? 3 points. The Torah, God's word. The temple, God's presence. And the eight lights. And the lamp which has the oil and supplies it. The 8th day in our liturgy is the day of eternity. 7 days are the days of creation. But the 8th day is the fulfillment of the world when it returns to its original image. In other words, it's in its perfection, as God had created it. The 8th day is the day of the resurrection. That's the day of the Christians. We keep Sabbath, and we keep the first of the Sabbaths. The one is the image of creation, the other is the image of the resurrection. For us, the eight lamps, I would love to celebrate Hanukkah and light the 8 candles. I light both creation and redemption. And I believe that I am in Jerusalem, even though I may do it at home. And what is the temple? In the Christian sense, the temple is an image, the earthly temple, of our body and of our humanity. Because there's a mystical relationship, as the fathers explain, and that is also Jewish mysticism as well, that the temple is each one human being, that God dwells in each one of us. And the temple is there as a reminder that we must all be turned into the temple. That's why we go to the temple. We say in Greek, when I go to church, to ecclesia, to the temple, to the nave, that I become the temple mystically. Now what happens in the temple happens inside me. If that doesn't happen, then I haven't churched myself, then I haven't been to the temple, then I'm not like the Hasmoneans. They offered their body as sacrifice to the Lord. And so the temple was reconstituted, and they were the precursors of the victory. That victory, which is a sign of what faith does to human beings. I think Jews and Greeks may then again become the sacrificial way of opening up the kingdom of God for all people. And that's my vision, and I hope that I have added a little more to what Professor Cohen so eloquently presented. Thank you very much.